Tonight, I want to tell you a quiet story about the softest kind of love. The kind that tiptoes in on ordinary days, brings you tea, waters the plants, and sits with you at the kitchen table. It begins with a lease, a spare room, and two men, minding their own healing. It ends with a hand reaching across a couch and a life opening like morning blinds. If your heart is tired or tender, lean back, breathe with me. You may find your own courage right where mine appeared, in that brief, brave second when he reached for my hand. If stories like this steady your breathing and warm your evening, please tap subscribe, give a gentle like, and share this with someone who could use a calm companion tonight. Your comments are welcome. We read them like letters. Now, settle in. Let's walk slowly into this love together, with care. I didn't invite love in. I didn't even make the bed for it. What I invited was a roommate, someone to split the rent, someone quiet enough not to upset the fragile peace I had, clumsily, pieced together. My lease renewal letter had arrived with the same startling thump as a medical chart landing on a desk. Important, heavy, insistent. The numbers marched across the page like a blood pressure reading edging too high. I needed help. So I made a listing that was brutally honest. 2-bedroom, light in the mornings, creaky floors. I cook on Sundays. I leave notes on the fridge because my brain forgets. Plants are great, parties not so much. You would think honesty would scare people off, but honesty made room for the right door to open. His name was Marco. He introduced himself in the lobby, a little out of breath, clutching a tote bag that said, "Support your libraries." I remember thinking that he had kind eyes, the kind that make a hallway feel less like a hallway and more like an invitation. He laughed softly when the elevator decided to stop between floors, and we climbed the stairs together, talking like people who were auditioning for a friendship without wanting to sound too eager. He was in between jobs, newer to the city then. I was, and learning to be brave in the way you learn to sleep in a new bed, slowly, with the lights on, telling your body that it's safe. If you're listening right now and your chest tightens at the word new, I see you. It's normal for the body to worry when it doesn't have a map. Take a small breath with me, in through the nose, and let it out slowly like you're fogging a mirror. Good. That's where our story begins. Not in a whirlwind, but in a careful exhale. I showed him the apartment, the paint peeling in charming stripes, the window that stuck in the winter, the view of rooftops and pigeon parades. He smiled at my plants, asked their names. I told him I named them shamelessly. Ruth, a rubber plant; Bee, a pothos that refused to quit; and Felix, a feathery fern that flirted with the idea of dying every week and then changed its mind. He nodded as if understanding the tender chaos of keeping things alive. "I'm clean," he said, standing at the sink as I ran the tap to show that it coughed at first, then poured. "Not perfect, but I'm the kind of clean that wipes a counter at midnight just because it'll make morning feel kinder." "That's a very specific kind of clean," I said, and he laughed. We set a few house rules that afternoon. Shoes by the door, groceries labeled unless up for sharing. Sunday night pasta was a standing invitation, no pressure. If one of us had a rough day, we could text the other a single word, cloudy. And it meant, please just be near me. No fixing, no advice, just presence. The rule came out of my mouth before I planned it. The way you sometimes discover the boundaries you needed as soon as someone stands in front of you who will honor them. He moved in 2 weeks later with 2 suitcases, a stack of art prints, and a guitar. He said he only played when he was sure people weren't listening. My favorite of his prints was a black and white street scene. 2 men in coats walking side by side, an umbrella tipped toward one and not the other, the kind of everyday intimacy that doesn't announce itself. In the first month, we were ships in neighboring harbors. Our mornings overlapped by 10 minutes. He would be at the kettle, and I'd be packing a lunch, placing leftovers into small containers because the future felt easier to greet when it had a meal waiting. Sometimes we talked about nothing. The buses that ran late, the neighbors, new dog, how the sunlight in our kitchen made even bruised bananas look photogenic. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, and that felt fine too, like the way a comfortable clinic waiting room knows not to fill every silence with sound. One Thursday, I came home feeling like a coat hung on a wrong-sized hook. My day had been long and full of small kindnesses that couldn't quite make up for the one big, unkind thing. A conversation that brushed past my boundaries and made the back of my neck heat. I dropped my bag, leaned against the door frame, and watched Marco stir a pot on the stove. It smelled like garlic and something bright. He looked up and studied my face, the way a good doctor studies a patient's eyes before looking at a chart. "Cloudy?" he asked, gentle. "Cloudy," I said. He slid me a glass of water first. Not words, water. Then he turned down the heat, clicked off the burner, and nodded toward the couch. We sat, a small space between us like a respectful pause. He didn't ask for details. He visited me in the present moment with quiet companionship, the kind that counts heartbeats without needing a stethoscope. "If it helps," he said after a while, "we can pretend the couch is a boat. Everything that can't sit with us stays. On shore." I smiled despite myself. We watched the steam from the pot curl like a story telling itself. After a few minutes, my jaw unclenched. My shoulders moved down out of my ears. The boat held. When we went back to the stove, the food was even better for having been cooked in a room that had chosen kindness. Routine can be a balm. Over the next months, routine wrapped around us like a soft blanket. We traded playlists. He introduced me to a singer who made grief sound like light through a stained glass window. I taught him how to cut onions without crying. He won anyway, on principle. We painted the hallway one Sunday and ended up with more paint on us than the wall. I learned that he hummed when he measured flour, and he learned that I had a habit of talking to myself when I typed a late-night email, the words like stepping stones across a shallow stream. Here is a small truth I want to offer with care. Sometimes the body recognizes safety before the mind does. You'll notice it in tiny calibrations. You'll eat slower. You'll leave your favorite mug in the cabinet because you trust it will be there tomorrow. You'll listen to the same song twice in a row without worrying what it says about you. You'll stand at the sink, brush your teeth beside another person, and the mirror won't feel crowded. It'll feel honest. Of course, none of this announced itself as romance. We were just two men learning to live in parallel, to keep house the way you keep a promise. Daily, imperfectly, earnestly. If there was a third presence in the apartment, it was an expanding quiet, the kind you get when night falls early and the lamps go on and the tea is warm and a page turns. We didn't name it. We simply let it be. The day he reached for my hand, it was raining in sheets. The city gets dramatic when it rains. Traffic lights blink a little slower and people walk, faster with their shoulders lifted like umbrellas. I texted him a photo from the grocery store, a mountain of lemons glowing like patient suns. "Supper therapy," I typed. "Lemon pasta?" He replied with a thumbs up and then, "Cravings, olives, trust me?" I did. I trusted him with olives, and playlists, and the way we stacked dishes like balancing acts. On my walk home, the storm found its voice. The wind turned streets into corridors of water. My scarf was soaked through. At the crosswalk near our building, the puddle leapt the curb and I misjudged, stepping into a miniature lake. The city has a way of humbling you. As I stomped up the stairs, Marco's door was open. He was there, waiting, 2 towels in hand, like a lifeguard in a very small pool. "Oh," he said, a laugh in the back of his throat. "You are a weather event." I dropped my bags and kicked off my shoes. He wrapped one towel around my shoulders, brisk, practical, caring, the way you do for someone without making it a production. Then we moved into the living room. The thunder quieter here, the aerial view of rain on the window making the world look grainy and private. We sat on the couch. He tucked his feet under him. I absorbed heat from the towel. The city outside was a handful of gray marbles. He told me about an errand that had turned into a conversation with an elderly neighbor who used to be a dancer. How her wrists fluttered when she spoke about the past, like birds taking off. I closed my eyes to listen better, and that's when it happened. Not a grand gesture, not a speech meant to be framed in a movie, just a movement. He reached across the small space between us and placed his hand gently over mine. It surprised me, but not in the way a door slamming does. More like the way a memory returns and you wonder how you lived around it. His hand was warm, a steadying warmth, the kind that says, "Here I am, and here you are, and neither of us has to do this. Bit alone." He didn't grip, he didn't claim, he just covered my hand like placing a coaster under a glass. Simple care. I opened my eyes and found his. He didn't move away. The rain sounded like 1,000 tiny decisions being made and unmade on the roof. I could feel my pulse, and I could feel his pulse, and they were not competing. They were listening. I was older than the version of myself who would have turned this into a joke. I had practiced being honest with my GP about anxiety, practiced naming what hurt without flinching. So I did the small, brave thing. I turned my hand palm up and interlaced our fingers. He inhaled, a faint catch, then softened. We didn't rush toward anything. We let our hands be a conversation the rest of us would catch up to. My shoulders, those faithful barometers, dropped again. He smiled, the sort of smile that includes you in it. And then, because the heart can be surprisingly practical, we both looked at the kitchen at the same time. "Pasta," he said. "Pasta," I agreed. Our hands remained linked for a moment longer, like an extra heartbeat at the end of a sentence. Then, we stood. The room felt the same and not the same. The kettle hissed. He grated lemon zest. I sliced olives. We moved around each other not like roommates, not like strangers negotiating counter space, but like people who had quietly learned the map of the other, where to set the bowl, when to step to the side, how to be near without crowding. When the pasta was done, he ladled it into 2 bowls and slid one toward me with a tenderness so ordinary it was almost invisible. Ordinary tenderness is the kind that changes your life. We ate at the small table by the window. The rain softened to a whisper. And there, between bites, we laid out the gentle facts, like placing things on a tray. "I want to be careful with you," he said. "And with me," I said. "I want to be careful with me, too." We smiled. If you've ever had a conversation, that felt like finally stepping onto a path your feet already knew. You know the relief in that smile. We talked about boundaries like grown-ups, because I have learned, and I offer this like a steady hand on your shoulder, that boundaries aren't fences to keep love out. They're handrails that help love walk safely. We agreed on a few things. We wouldn't kiss the first night. We wouldn't press meaning into every moment like our love was a fragile document that needed a notary. We'd let the days do part of the talking. We would hold hands when it felt right and be okay with letting go when the subway got crowded. And we would communicate, even when it was awkward, because awkward honesty is better than silent worry. That night, when we washed dishes, our arms brushed and nobody moved away. He dried the glasses like they were instruments not to be rushed. I folded the dish towel and hung it straight, a small domestic blessing. When we went to our rooms, we paused. In the hallway, bare feet on the rug. "Cloudy?" he asked, a kindness and a joke. "Clear," I said. "But a good clear." "Good clear," he said, and he leaned forward and rested his forehead lightly against mine. No fireworks, just warmth. Then we said good night, like people who were introducing their routines to a new roommate named Hope. Days after that were different in tiny ways. The Monday morning tea tasted slightly sweeter. We had a new diagonal in our movements through the apartment, a new language of touch, A hand at the small of a back at the stove, a shoulder bump in the hallway, fingers, meeting under the blanket during a movie. When he sat to tie his shoes, he would tap his knee twice, and I would know he was ready to go, but not to hurry. When I came home and found keys on the hook and his jacket draped, I felt the exact sensation you get when you hear a familiar voice in a busy cafe and turn toward it without thinking. Not everything was weightless. One afternoon, his phone lit up with a name he didn't answer. He glanced at me, then away. "It's nothing," he said, which is so often not quite true. After dinner, sitting on that same couch where the weather had introduced our hands, he said, "I came out late. Not to everyone." He rubbed his thumb along the seam of the cushion. "I don't want to hide, but also, I've learned to be careful." "I understand careful," I said. "We can be careful together." He nodded. We talked about families, like people discussing weather patterns across state lines, how some storms pass and some set in for a season, how sometimes you learn to drive in the rain. We didn't decide everything. We simply decided not to decide alone. There is a kind of intimacy that comes from doing ordinary hard things together. The apartment's heater broke in January and we lived in hoodies and made soup and admired, our breath like we were our own weather station. I got sick for 3 days, a body's way of announcing it needs rest, and he made a tea of ginger and lemon and honey, and I learned how to accept care without narrating my guilt. He had a job interview that frightened him because it mattered, and I ironed his shirt and said, "You're allowed to want this." He came home with cheeks pinked by cold and hope. We sat on the floor beside the heater vents once they worked, again, and laid our hands over the warm slats, 2 cats in human costumes. We didn't make a spectacle of firsts. Our first kiss arrived like the kettle's rise to a whistle, inevitable but not hurried. On a Saturday mid-afternoon, sunlight textured the wall with the shadow of Ruth's broad leaves, and we were listening to Marco's favorite album. He leaned in. I leaned in. Our mouths met the way you might read a handwritten note aloud for the first time, careful to get the meaning right. I say this plainly because it was plain. A gentle kiss, no performance, no witness but us. If you are older or careful or both, you know the dignity of a kiss that understands the stories that led to it. After, we did the strange and lovely thing of laughing softly. He pressed his forehead to my shoulder. The kettle clicked. Someone's radio broke into a line of an old song from the next building over. We listened like people who had been given a blessing. Of course, life continued to be life. Bills came. The sink clogged, and we learned how to take apart a pipe without becoming enemies. He got the job, and we did a small dance in the kitchen, not ironic at all. We navigated the first time someone mistook us for brothers at a hardware store, and the first time someone called us, "you two," with that knowing warmth, and the way your heart learns to make peace with both errors and accuracies. If you've been waiting, if you've been careful with yourself, I want to say this aloud, slowly. There is no expiration date on learning to hold a hand and tell the truth. Love can arrive at 35 or 75, after a divorce, after a move, after a quiet decade, in a kitchen that needs painting and a life that needs a good night's sleep. Your body deserves a gentle home. Your heart deserves patient company. There's time. The first time we told someone, we told our friend Divya, who had the kind of laugh that makes neighbors forgive parties. She came over on a Friday with samosas in a box and hugged Marco first, then me, then both of us like celebratory parentheses. "I wondered," she said, eyes twinkling. "You wondered?" I asked, scandalized and delighted. She nodded at the magnets on our fridge, grocery lists interleaved, a concert ticket, a comic cutout. "Your fridge is dating," she said, and we laughed until we needed to sit down. Sharing ourselves out loud changed less than I expected and more than I knew. It didn't change the way we brushed our teeth, but it changed the way the world felt when we walked through it together. Lighter, As if we had set down a backpack we forgot we were carrying. When we held hands on the street, people looked, or didn't, and either way it was okay. The first time an elderly woman on the bus smiled, patted my sleeve, and said, "It's good to be next to your person," I nearly cried. Her voice had both the certainty and the softness of a nurse who has been in rooms where real things happen. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The plant that had considered death every week decided to show off, green as an emerald. We bought a small picnic blanket at a yard sale and took it to the park and watched dogs chase joys they didn't try to explain. On the blanket, he put his head in my lap and squinted up at me, and I smoothed his hair like shingling a roof. He fell asleep. I read a book and, every few pages, checked that his chest rose and fell. That tiny check-in, alive, alive, felt like a prayer disguised as a habit. One evening, we cooked for our neighbors, a mixed, marvelous crowd. A single dad from down the hall, a retired couple who played chess at their table daily, 2 grad students who offered to bring dessert, and arrived with 3 store-bought pies and a shrug that said, "We tried." We pushed our small furniture together and made the space fit the life we wanted. After dinner, the retired couple shared their story. "We met at a bus stop," the taller one said. "In another city, in another time. We spent years pretending. We weren't holding the same umbrella." "And then?" Marco asked. "And then one day," the other said gently, "he reached for my hand, and we decided to stop pretending." The room went very quiet. The old stories connect to the new, ones like IV lines delivering courage. We nodded. We did the dishes in companionable silence later, suds rising, the window cracked, the city's night breath drifting in. There were hard days, too. An anniversary rolled around of a loss I didn't announce to the world. Grief visited, as grief does. I told Marco, I might be quieter this week. He understood. He brought home flowers that didn't fit any vase. Generous, unruly. We put them in a mixing bowl. I sat on the floor and let the sorrow pass through me like weather, and he did not try to hold the umbrella over me in a way that would crowd me. He simply sat nearby, tea in hand, a presence like a lighthouse. When I was ready, he put our favorite record on and invited me to sway in the kitchen. We didn't make it about happiness. We made it about being here. I remember the day we talked about moving from roommates who love each other to partners who live together fully. It was an ordinary Saturday, and we were disentangling the box of Christmas lights no one admits is on top of the wardrobe all year. "I like us," he said. The lights pooled like static water in his lap. "I like us too," I said. "I think we're good for each other." He bit his lip. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting to be sure enough to make something official? And then you realize your life has already decided?" I tried to say something wise. Instead, I started listing tiny proofs, doctor-like, as if building a chart. "You remind me to drink water. We learned each other's coffee order without making it a quiz. When the smoke alarm went off because I got heroic with the broiler, we took turns waving a towel at it and laughing instead of panicking." We looked at each other and saw less fear and more recognition. "I want you on the lease," I said. He smiled. "I want you in my future." We made a plan because plans calm the part of the brain that wants maps. We would talk to the landlord. We would tell a few more people in our circles. We would visit his aunt, who lived at the edge of the dead city, and baked cakes that could cure pessimism. And we would keep doing our little rituals. Sunday pasta, Friday flowers, small, not fussed over, and the cloudy text when life needed gentleness. When we went to sign the new lease, the building manager, Harold, a gruff man with a good heart he pretended not to have, slid the papers across. "You boys have made this place nicer," he said, staring intently at the stapler as if it had secrets. "Feels like the hall smells like lemon a bit more." "It's probably the pasta," Marco said, and Harold harumphed into a smile he saved for after people turned away. I pretended not to see and tucked our copy into a folder, my hands careful as if it were a photo. We marked the day quietly. A new kitchen towel, 2 matching mugs from the shop on the corner. On the walk home, we held hands on purpose, in daylight. In front of our door, not just in the soft anonymity of night. He squeezed once, twice like a code. I squeezed back. Fear showed up, an old guest, then left when it realized the room was already full of better company. I want to say something here for anyone who needs it. Anyone at the edge of their own hand-reaching. We weren't fearless. We were attentive. We did not rush the long conversation between past and present, and when we made errors, we repaired them. That is love in its practical clothes, repair. The summer the city heat rose off the sidewalks like music. We took a small trip to the coast. A bus, a walk, a motel room with a fan that hummed like a content bee. We sat on the beach and watched gulls pretend they were above it all and then swoop for a chip like greedy poets. We held hands under a towel not because we needed to hide, but because wind can make even warm days ask for extra warmth. Later, back at the motel, we lay side by side and listened to the ocean churn through its nightly rounds like a nurse doing checks. We talked about nothing at all, the worst sandwiches we'd ever had, the best rainstorms, the strangest socks. The ordinary is where intimacy proves itself. We came home sun-tired and new somehow, like bread after the oven. Our apartment looked extra itself, like it had been cleaned by time. We set down bags, opened windows, and the plants leaned toward us politely. On the counter, a note from Divya. "Welcome home. I watered your little jungle. It is dramatic and well." The day I realized that the hand he reached with had become my compass, we were in a grocery aisle debating tomatoes. "I like the ones with a scar," he said. "They taste like they've lived a little." I laughed, and a child nearby, sitting in his cart like a benevolent king, pointed at us and announced, "They're friends." His mother, embarrassed, shushed him. We waved. "We are," I said, smiling. But then I caught Marco's eye and saw it. Not just friendship. The deeper thing, the steadier thing, the love that could sit with both joy and sadness and not run. It felt like a diagnosis I welcomed. You have a condition called peace. We went home with imperfect tomatoes and good bread. That night, after bedtime, the dishes, he took my hand, again and again, an old new ritual, and we stood at the window to watch the city settle. "I didn't know if this was for me," he said. "I thought maybe I had missed the window." "You didn't," I said. "The window is right here." He nodded. We didn't need the perfect words. Our hands learned to do some of the talking. In the months that followed, we found our way into a rhythm that felt both sturdy and flexible. Big life decisions visited us. Job shifts, a possible move, the long conversation about who we were telling next, and we made them like we made soup. Taste, adjust, taste again. When we argued, we tried to argue toward each other, not away. "I hear you" became a sentence we learned to mean. "I need a minute" became a kindness, not a door slam. The next winter, the city lost power in a storm, and we learned how to be a small island together. We pulled the mattress into the living room, layered coats, set up candles like our own constellations. We read aloud to each other from our embarrassingly large stash of takeout menus, doing dramatic readings of pizza toppings. We counted the minutes between gusts of wind like contractions, amused and alert. We held hands under the blanket. I can't explain why that night felt like a vow, but it did. Not a big formal promise, but the angle of a life leaning toward another life. When the lights blinked on at 2 a.m., we didn't cheer. We laughed softly, relieved, then fell asleep, our fingers still meeting in the space where hands learn to find one another even in dreams. And so, the story continued, as lives do, not with a final sentence, but with a continued paragraphing. On quiet Sunday afternoons, I would find him with his guitar, playing a few chords, not for an audience, but for the air between us. I learned the song by heart without ever knowing its name. We went to the little cafe where they drew fern leaves. "In your latte?" and the barista began to ask, "Together?" And we would answer yes, not just for the coffee order. We visited his aunt and told her. She hugged us, then cut a cake the way you cut certainty, straight, generous. "I always knew you were waiting for a good hand to hold," she told him, then pressed a container of leftovers into my arms like a benediction. I got a photo of the two of them for our fridge, the fridge that, as Divya had said, was dating. Sometimes I still think of the exact second, the tactile reality of his hand covering mine for the first time. The way your body calibrates to a steady touch, the way your nervous system, that tired little guardian, recognizes an ally. We tell each other the story sometimes because love deserves to be retold in safe houses. "You were shivering," he says. "From the rain," I say. "And from relief," he adds, not unkindly. And then one of us reaches for the other as if touching the story itself. If you are where I was, careful, hopeful, walking a quiet apartment and setting the table for two one fork at a time, I want to leave you with this. The world is still, full of gentle reachings. A hand can mean many things. It can mean, "I am here," and "let's be careful," and "we don't have to hurry," and "this is real." If your hand is the one that reaches first, that is brave. If your hand is the one that waits and then meets the other halfway, that is brave too. We don't measure courage by who speaks first. We measure it by how truthfully we speak when we do. On screen, the camera pulls back to show the apartment, as it is tonight. Dishes drying, a plant leaning, two pairs of shoes by the door. And in the center, a small lit circle on the table where two hands rest. Comfortable, not performing, simply being. We're still just us, still making pasta. Still checking the weather, still putting a note on the fridge that says milk and another below it that says love you. Ordinary is not a downgrade. Ordinary is the clinic where miracles come for their checkups. When he reaches for my hand now, some nights it's the same steady pressure as that first time. And some nights it's a playful squeeze, and some nights it's a drift, fingers barely touching as we fall asleep. Every time my body remembers the map it learned. This is the way home. This is the pulse that says we're alive. This is the life we built with small tools, a kettle, a song, a grocery list, a shared key, a word on the fridge that says cloudy, another that says clear. We were roommates. And then we were us. Not because the world recognized us, though many did and many didn't, but because we recognized ourselves in each other. Our story didn't begin with fireworks. It began with towels and soup and a hand that found mine and said, without ceremony, "Stay." And I did.